And the moon is so perfectly positioned that because of where it is, when we have an eclipse, it is the same size as the sun. That's why we have the eclipse. And the authors of Who Built the Moon say this: the moon is bigger than it should be, apparently older than it should be, and much lighter in mass than it should be. It occupies an unlikely orbit and is so extraordinary that all existing explanations for its presence are fraught with difficulties, and none of them could be considered remotely watertight. When you go on and you say, where'd the moon come from, you get this story. And like so much in what we call science, that people take it as fact, it's actually a theory which repeated becomes fact. But then you go back and you find that it's a theory. And the first one is the moon was created by what's known as the whack theory, or the big whack theory. And that is that a Mars-type planet came in, smacked the Earth, great chunk came off, and became the moon. When the physics of that didn't work out, they came up with the double whack theory, where the Mars-type planet hit the Earth, bit comes off or whatever, and then the Mars-type planet thinks, well, I'll give him one with the right, I'll give you one with the left, comes back and whacks it again, the old 1-2. Talk about bloody desperate. And the truth is, and honest scientists will tell you, they have no bloody clue where the moon come from, and it shouldn't, by physics, be there. This guy, Isaac Asimov, a Russian professor of biochemistry, did a lot of writing on this sort of stuff, and he said this, quite rightly: we cannot help but come to the conclusion that the moon by rights ought not to be there. The fact that it is one of those strokes of luck almost too good to accept. Small planets such as Earth with weak gravitational fields might well lack satellites. In general then, when a planet does have satellites, those satellites are much smaller than the planet itself. Therefore, even if the Earth has a satellite, there would be every reason to suspect that at best it would be a tiny world, perhaps 30 miles in diameter. But that is not so. Earth not only has a satellite, but it is a giant satellite, 2,160 miles in diameter. How is it then that that tiny Earth has one? Amazing. Some scientists don't even talk about a planet-satellite relationship, but a planet-planet relationship. The moon's bigger than Pluto. The best explanation for the moon is observational error. The moon doesn't exist, that scientist said. Another one from NASA: it seems easier to explain the non-existence of the moon than its existence. And then we get the hollow moon. This is what I'm saying, and others have said, is that it's a hollowed-out planetoid. In November 1969, the moon was hit by a lunar module to the equivalent of 1 ton of TNT. The shock waves built up, and NASA scientists said the moon rang like a bell. Maurice Ewing, a co-director of the seismic experiment, told the news conference, "As for the meaning of it, I'd rather not make an interpretation right now, but it is as though someone had struck a bell, say in the belfry of a church, a single blow, and found that the reverberation from it continued for 30 minutes. It got a bigger smack eventually, which I'll come to." Frank Press from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, said that for a rather small impact to produce an effect that lasted for 30 minutes was quite beyond the range of our experience. This is a guy called Gordon MacDonald. He said in the early 1960s, it would seem that the moon is more like a hollow than a homogeneous sphere. And this guy from MIT said the lunar orbiter experiments had vastly improved knowledge of the moon's gravitational field and indicated the frightening possibility that the moon might be hollow. Now we'll come to this bigger whack. A launch vehicle struck the moon with the equivalent of 11 tons of TNT, and NASA scientists said the moon reacted like a gong and continued to vibrate for 3 hours and 20 minutes to a depth of up to 25 miles. Ken Johnson, a supervisor of the Data and Photo Control Department during the Apollo missions, told Who Built the Moon author Alan Butler that the moon not only rang like a bell, but the whole moon wobbled in such a precise way that it was almost as though it had gigantic hydraulic damper struts inside it. These two Russian scientists from the Soviet Academy of Scientists wrote an article in 1970 in Sputnik magazine in Russia headed, "Is the Moon the Creation of an Alien Intelligence?" And all these years later, it indicates to the fact that they were right. What they point out, and others point out, is the outer surface of the moon is extremely hard and contains minerals like titanium, Moon rocks have been found to contain processed metals, including brass and mica, and the elements uranium-236 and neptunium-237 that have never been found to occur naturally. Uranium-236 is a long-lived radioactive nuclear waste and is found in spent nuclear fuel and reprocessed uranium. Neptunium-237 is a radioactive metallic element and a byproduct of nuclear reactors and the production of plutonium. Some lunar rocks have been found to contain 10 times more titanium than titanium-rich rocks on Earth. Titanium is used in supersonic jets, deep-diving submarines, and spacecraft. Dr. Harold Urey, the winner of the Nobel Prize for Chemistry, said he was terribly puzzled by the rocks from the moon and in particular their titanium content. He said the samples were mind-blowers and that he could not account for the titanium. The two Russian scientists said in their article, if a material had to be devised to protect a giant artificial satellite from the unfavorable effects of temperature from the cosmic radiation and meteorite bombardment, the experts would probably have hit upon precisely these refractory metals. Refractory metals are incredibly resistant to heat and wear. In that case, is it not clear why lunar rock is such an extraordinarily poor heat conductor, a factor which so amazed the astronauts? Wasn't that what the designers of this super Sputnik of the Earth were after? From the engineer's point of view, this spaceship of ages long past, which we call the Moon, is superbly constructed. They say it's a hollowed-out planetoid, and they say if you're going to launch an artificial Sputnik, then it is advisable to make it hollow. At the same time, it would be naive to imagine that anyone capable of such a tremendous space project would be satisfied simply with some kind of giant empty trunk hurled into a near-Earth trajectory. It is more likely that what we have here is a very ancient spaceship, the interior of which was filled with fuel for the engines and materials and appliances for repair work, navigation instruments, observation equipment, and all manner of machinery. In other words, everything necessary to enable this caravel of the universe to serve as a Noah's Ark, appropriate, of intelligence, perhaps even as the home of a whole civilization, envisaging a prolonged thousands of millions of years existence and long wanderings through space, thousands of millions of miles. Naturally, the hull of such a spaceship must be super tough in order to stand up to the blows of meteorites and sharp fluctuations between extreme heat and extreme cold. Probably the shell is a double-layered affair. The basis is a dark armoring of about 20 miles in thickness, and outside of it some kind of more loosely packed covering, a thinner layer averaging about 3 miles. In certain areas where the lunar seas and craters are, the upper layer is quite thin, in some cases non-existent.